we didn't want to go too narrow to only focus on CO2 emissions because that's not the only thing that matters. But then on the other hand, we had to be careful about not going too broad because then it would be difficult to measure all the guidelines across all these different potential impacts.
Hello everyone, welcome to Green.io, the podcast for responsible technologists building a greener digital world one byte at a time. On Green.io, we explore how to reduce the environmental impact of our digital world. Our guests from across the globe share insights, tools, and alternative approaches, enabling people within the tech sector and beyond to boost digital sustainability. If this episode doesn't sound as usual, it's just that I'm recording it in a friend's house, being without house and without office since a few weeks ago. Don't worry, the refurbishment of a house should be finalized before December and the beginning of the cyclone season here in Réunion Island. And I should also soon join a new incubator place where I will help startups with their impact both on the Tech for Green side, but also on the Green for Tech side, which is the DNA of this podcast. Talking about DNA, what does HTML and CSS have in common? They are the ultimate worldwide standards on how we code on the web, a bit like DNA. And they are maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium. And the W3C, this is how we will name it later, maintain many more standards, such as XML, SVG, or WebRTC, just to name a few. But the W3C also provide guidelines, the most famous one being the accessibility guidelines, called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Today, WCAG are used in countless law and regulations, frameworks, best practices, sources, etc. In a nutshell, what W3C decides will be used in every website around the world. And on August 31st this year, the W3C Sustainable Web Design Community Group, nicknamed SustiWeb, released the first ever web sustainability guidelines as a draft version. This means that every people working in web development will be impacted at some point or another. We already talked about the W3C and its ongoing work in several episodes, including 3 with active participants in the development of the document, Tim Frick, Anne Faubry, and Sandy Denhert. But this time, the entire episode will be dedicated to W3C guidelines, and I have the pleasure to be joined by 2 other very active participants. Ines Akrap, who is one of the pillars of the Web Development Committee, and Lukasz Mastalerz, who is the chair of the Metrics Committee. On top of a W3C spare time commitment, Ines is also a seasoned software developer with a knack for web performance and sustainability. She's based in Munich, Germany, where she is a fellow hiker in the beautiful Alps, like me, in Réunion Island. Not the Alps, the volcanoes for me. And she actually hikes well less than she would like for, like me, in Réunion Island. On top of his W3C spare time commitment, Lukasz is also a climate data architect. And before that, he was IT Architect Director at UBS. He's also a fellow facilitator of the Digital Collage Workshop, where we met first before this W3C adventure all started. He has contributed to develop the workshop in Krakow, Poland, where he currently lives. Welcome, Ines and Lukasz. Thanks a lot for joining Green.io today, especially on such short notice.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. At Climate Arc, we're defining our work as building arcs between NGOs, finance, and corporates. And I think your mission is to build bridges between people looking into sustainable digitalization. So I think our missions are very much aligned.
Very much aligned. I like to mention, to explain my job as with the Green.io podcast as a bridge builder. So it 100% resonates with me. So, my first question will be actually not about the story of these guidelines, how we achieved such a great document, etc., etc. It's all about getting our hands dirty right from the start. And for this, I'd like to ask you a tricky question. Could you share your top 3 favorite guidelines with a bit of explanation about your choice? And I know it's not an easy task having plenty of choices here among the 93 listed guidelines.
It's like making me choose which, in between children, which one is my favorite. Luckily, I'll only have one child, but I guess I would go for avoiding unnecessary assets. That would be like the first one that kind of goes straight away towards what I think digital sustainability is a lot about, and that's just reduction in itself as well, just less, less, less. So I would say that one. Then as well, same thing with the third parties. So again, I come from a very, very web performance perspective here. And these third parties is something that I've seen so many times in my work that are just being dropped there, left, and then like just sit there, and of course are being transferred every single time a user visited the website, so like for years. And then as well, I think I would go with the one that I'm actually currently working on with the client, which is browser caching as well. That one kind of goes towards the line of bringing data closer to the user, not having to travel long distances, which we all know this is kind of a current proxy for carbon measurement when it comes to web. So I think those would be kind of the 3 I would go for mostly.
Your 3 favorite children. Oh, how terrible that sounds.
Yeah. Terrible. It's terrible.
And by the way, the third-party issue you've mentioned made me thought about the Are My Third-Party Green of a fellow web performance and web sustainability expert, Farshad Irani. Did you ever use his tool?
Not yet, but I am planning to. I'm a huge fan of his. So.
Yeah, he was the very first guest on the show, so I've got always like a soft spot for him. And what about you, Lukasz? What are your top 3 guidelines?
That's a tricky question indeed, but I'd maybe try to go with sustainable hosting. And main reason for this is that there's a big difference between hosting in a region with low carbon intensity of a grid versus high intensity. It could be up to 2 orders of magnitude of difference. So I think impact-wise, that's going to be a big one. Then I would maybe go for sustainable product strategy because obviously all these decisions have to be first taken on the business side to basically drive implementation of more lower level guidelines. So without right product strategy, there's small chance to implement these more technical guidelines. And then maybe on a more specific technical side, native features, because they're both more sustainable, usually faster, and cheaper to implement.
That's funny, Lukasz, that you connected both the design phase and the hosting phase, because, and I don't know if you share this view, but I would love your feedback on it. Usually when I'm with a client trying to deploy a green IT or digital sustainability strategy, I used to tell them, the easiest and less impact phase will be the hosting phase, but that's okay. You should start with it. You should start with ops people starting to measure and reduce, because, this is very important stuff that we need, having measurements and having a clear understanding of what cost what in terms of carbon and also environmental impact. That's usually pretty easy to do. We've got tools, and ops people are pretty comfortable with putting tools to measure things. But then be aware that the impact will be way less than when you have actually the hardest part, which is involving the design people and starting a truly sustainable product journey, which is, challenging all the time. Do I really need this? Can I reuse something? The 3R, etc., etc. And I kind of like the idea that you picked the 2 opposites And what are your take on it?
Yeah, I think if someone is starting to build greenfield from scratch, then it's probably easier because it's easier to now look into different metrics of hosting options and just go for green from day one. It's obviously not that easy if an application is already running and some changes have to be done there. Then it's more effort and cost, of course.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So now that you hated me a little with pick your 3 favorites, would you like to share maybe one guideline with which you are a bit less comfortable?
So I guess I will have to disappoint you a bit here because let's just go with I'm very comfortable with most of them. So we worked on them together. We revised them a lot and all that. So I guess from my perspective, this one, it's very, very hard to pick. I don't know. I absolutely don't know which one I would say that I'm kind of not comfortable with.
And that's a perfectly understandable answer. What about you, Lukasz?
I'm hoping this is as tricky as it gets, and you're not planning third level of difficulty of these questions.
The boss level.
Exactly. But one of the things that probably needs some thought is maybe a guideline of open source. That would be the right guideline in general, but I wouldn't be maybe too dogmatic about this. I can imagine use cases where something that's not open source could be a better solution than pure open source.
And what would you be the key takeaways? If you meet someone who was not aware at all about the W3C work, you meet your colleague at the coffee machine and you say, there is a few things that you should very seriously bear in mind about this guideline, and these are?
I'd probably say that across the world, especially in Europe, slowly in the States, we're starting to see sustainability regulation appearing and getting some traction. And obviously, digital world is a big part of many businesses. We try to align guidelines with existing taxonomies, which means that enhancements in web sustainability can be embedded into bigger picture of sustainability reporting initiatives.
Ines?
Yeah, I guess I would go again a bit more from a software engineering perspective, which is that the accessibility guidelines that you mentioned before were so crucial to the topic, which is very important just because they gave a clear overview. They gave a recipe in a way how to achieve something. And I think this is something that we're trying to get as well with the sustainability, that the users in this case, the developers, the product owners, the designers, so everyone being involved in the development of the digital products have a place to look at, to have a list of, not to have to be spread around, but just kind of somewhere where they have this, in a way, let's say just checklist.
Yeah, fair point. Now, moving from the ground level, I would say, I'd like to talk a bit and ask you to highlight us a bit about the building, the process, underlying choices, etc., etc. And maybe starting with the obvious question with a bit of history first, how these guidelines were created. Lukasz, do you want to start?
Sure. So W3C, Sustainable Web Design Community Group, has been created 10 years ago. And sometime mid-2022, the group started to actively work on what has been released just a few weeks ago. The group consisted of about 50 people from roughly 50 different organizations working together across 5 different committees. There was a committee focusing on user experience, web development, There's a committee focusing on infrastructure, business, and committee focusing on metrics. And we've been working together, having regular meetings, drafting what now has been transformed into ReSpec, which is W3C's standard format, and launched a couple of weeks ago in Sevilla during Tipeee conference.
Ines, do you want to add some specificities or your personal point of view on it?
Yeah, actually, I joined the group end of 2022, and it was a very interesting process. This is my first time creating something like this, participating in a W3C group, and I guess my favorite part as well was the discussions we had. No, we have this monthly meetings and all the discussions about the topic, because in the end of the day, it's a very complex topic. It was very, very interesting to do this, like with colleagues who are interested about the topic.
Now, that's interesting because a lot of things were discussed, and maybe I'd like your feedback on the some things that we've heard quite a lot, which is the rating system, and actually the fact that unlike the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which uses A to AAA, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the future, I guess it will change to bronze to gold. You've chosen a system of low, medium, and high, and it's not exactly the same philosophy. Could you explain us why?
So at the very beginning, we started to impact measuring from the mapping of different types of impacts we want to account for. Then as a next step, we did quite a bit of research on how deep we can get into actual metrics. And then we quickly realized that with the current state of research in many of these areas, it's very difficult to give precise figures for this impact. That's how we ended up just rating them on this 3-level scale, low, medium, high. And then with this, we also decided to use a report that you probably know very well, because that's a report that's underlying many materials in digital collage. Report from greenIT.fr, which distributes impact from data centers, networking, and end-user devices across different categories of impacts, like not only emissions or energy use, but also materials and water usage. Then we scored all the guidelines for their impact on data centers, networking, and end-user devices. And we combined these figures to come up with final assessment values for all these metrics.
And that's a very important point, because you've chosen not to focus only on carbon, but also a variety of environmental metrics. And actually, it goes beyond environment, because, correct me if I'm wrong, there are also privacy, social equity, and accessibility. Why did you choose to have such a large impact mix, I would say?
Yeah, that was a big topic for a discussion at the very beginning of our work. And obviously, we didn't want to go too narrow to only focus on CO2 emissions, because that's not the only thing that matters. But then on the other hand, we had to be careful about not going too broad, because then it would be difficult to measure all the guidelines across all these different potential impacts. That's how we ended up aligning with GRI standards, which are used in sustainability reporting. And we started with 4 categories there. We started with CO2 emissions, energy usage, water, and materials. But now aligning to GRI also gives us the ability to expand to many other categories in the future. So there are not only these environmental categories, but we can also easily go beyond that into the full scope of what you'd call ESG.
And if I imagine a discussion between a web developer or a designer and an ESG expert within the same company, how this use of GRI would help them to communicate, concretely speaking, how they will leverage the W3C guidelines to connect with their two different spheres that sometimes are very distinct, especially in big companies.
It's a good question. And I think there are probably many different ways that these two worlds can be connected. But one thing I could imagine would be to go from impact, from ratings of impacts, where ESG team's primary focus is, then transform this into a set of guidelines that would help to implement improvements for the categories that the ESG team is mainly concerned about.
That's very uncommon today in the green IT fields and beyond, to try to connect with the main sustainability frameworks that are shaping our understanding on sustainability and which are evolving quite a lot. So yeah, it's a very moving area, and I thought the idea was really enlightening. Ines, there is one aspect of how the guidelines have been created that I thought was very interesting, but I wonder how practical this is, and I would like your feedback and maybe some examples from you. It is the cost, or how important it is and how difficult it will be. Could you explain us a bit why you made this choice and how we should use this criteria?
Yeah, so I actually really love this part. No, when you mean like high impact, low effort, for example.
Definitely.
So this is something that we've been using as well, describing some of the optimizations for web performance for a while. And it kind of, since these guidelines are not done exactly the same way as accessibility, which kind of has these levels as well, and like they kind of build on top of each other here as well. It's quite, I would say, up to a level random. So you don't have to go through the list, number 1, number 2, number 93. You can pick any one that you want. So usually when I talk about this, I say just go for the high impact, low effort. And this is something, again, that's very useful when it comes to these discussions inside of the development team itself. This topic is a very vertical topic, and I think everyone in the whole team should be aware, from a product owner to the tester, content creator, of course, developer, designers, everyone. And I do use this as well while working with clients, checking once I see the issues that we have. Of course, we go first for the one that's going to have highest impact, but it will take us, the least resources, the least time, whatever you want to calculate it. But this is kind of as well prioritizations, and it's ease of putting something, let's say, in the line for, in the end of the day, to be developed and to be optimized.
Aren't you afraid that all the guidelines with high effort, whether you have or not high impact, will be deprioritized? And I take the example of something dear to the heart of many W3C members, which is use open source tools. High impact, but high effort.
Well, all the hard stuff, we sometimes have to take the harder route, I think not necessarily. So depending on how quality, of course, in the end of the day, you want your product to be, it should be done well. We all know that, no? So it's definitely, with these things, it's some kind of faster wins. But overall, I guess we would encourage you to go through all the guidelines. This can just give you a bit of an order, so you can focus on those high impact, low effort first. However, the high effort should be tackled at some point as well. So I guess this is depending on a personal level, no? Like eat that frog methodology, if you want to do that, first thing in the morning, or you want to leave it for the last, is something, again, that just goes towards every single team to decide how they want to tackle them.
Okay, so we run through most of the framework. There is also something which is a bit specific to these guidelines, or at least compared to other frameworks, which is the use of this success criterion. Could you elaborate a bit of why you've chosen to use a success criterion and what is the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, for me, it's probably simple. I see these as basically guidelines on how to actually execute the implementation. So helper for implementing.
Yeah, a bit of a checklist.
That was what I was wondering. So that's really the philosophy behind it. Like, you can use it as a checklist to make sure that you are aiming to the right direction.
Yeah,
exactly.
Now, regarding the overall guidelines in this draft version, there is something that we've heard here and there, which is people acknowledging that it is a huge contribution. There is not that many people saying this was a waste of time. Actually, I could not find a single comment that went in that direction. So obviously it answers a need. But some people criticized it because it was too vague sometimes and the guidelines were not that much practical. What is your answer to this? By how much is it missing the point?
I would say that for some guidelines, they are very specific. They go down to sharing code examples on what to do to actually implement them. Some of them are definitely more generic. Obviously, you cannot provide code example for guideline within business strategy category. So they're maybe a little bit more open. But at the same time, whenever guideline is not specific enough for people to implement, we're looking for feedback. We're looking for contributions to try to make them more actionable.
Yeah, I guess I would completely agree with this. It's just, it was very hard to draw the line, what's more towards generic, what's more of practical. But yeah, as Lukasz says as well, it's some are on one side, some on the other side, but they're especially, I would again say, for the web development part, it's quite practical. It's up to the code examples, yeah.
And because it refers quite a lot at the beginning, at least, to the 6 principles of the Sustainable Web Manifesto. And I was wondering, Ines, are these kind of principles used and useful on day-to-day coding activities, according to you, or are they more helpful as some kind of a North Star metrics when you create something like these guidelines, but it's too far away from day-to-day job?
I think this is something that should be ingrained in the culture. I think this is something that we should have on the back of our mind while we are making the decisions when it comes to, again, design, development, any aspect of the actual product.
A bit like a checklist once again, but more on a generic ground, like, okay, am I still working in a way to produce clean, efficient, open, honest, regenerative, and resilient code?
Exactly. That would be great if you actually come to the part where you're checking them, like each one. But even if you have just a few, again, if you just have this at the back of your mind while you're doing stuff, it's already, I guess, a great progress.
And to be honest, the regenerative or resilient part is not that many often checked. And I don't know about you, but resiliency is not that much on the agenda of many dev team. But that's a different topic.
Hopefully it changes in the future.
Yeah, well, I think it will change in the future because what we've used to take for granted, like, available 24/7, cheap energy and, completely unrelated to our environment cloud will, I guess, at some point will be less and less the case. We've seen already what happened in the UK when they've been hit by a heat wave. So I got it. The guidelines are, for some of them, maybe a bit too generic, or at least they have to be generic because they embrace a wide topic. But some of them, as Ines mentioned, are pretty specific, especially when it comes to a web development. So talking about this, if I was a designer or a web dev, or pretty much, someone working in a digital agency, etc., and I had to start somewhere with this pretty intense document. We're talking about the 93 guidelines. It's, I guess, 200 pages, more than 200 pages. Where should I start and how should I apprehend such a massive document? Because, of course, my time is scarce and I cannot necessarily run through the entire document and read all the 93 guidelines. I know it should be done, but hey, that's not how life is being played today.
Sure. So I guess I'd start probably with at a glance document that summarizes all the guidelines on just a couple of pages. It's easy to read and it's easy to use to navigate to different parts of actual guideline content. Then obviously, depending on what you're doing, you'll be focusing on some specific category. So if you're responsible for strategy, you'd be focusing on business guidelines. If you're focusing on user experience, you'll be focusing on UX guidelines. So this is also going to help you to select subsection of the document that you should be looking into. And then obviously impact, that's big. You should be probably focusing on a high impact first. And then we also have tagging that help in the navigation. So you can also use tags across all these guidelines to drill into some specific topic.
I guess Lukasz told it all, but I would just say as well, bear with us a bit longer because the team behind sustainablewebdesign.org is working on making this a bit more legible and to be able to navigate it a bit more easily.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think that's very valuable insights because people should not be afraid of the amount of work that has to be done, but start a step-by-step approach. So actually, Lukasz mentioned that if some people are not comfortable with some guidelines, when they say they're too generic or not actionable enough, they should provide feedback, which leads me to a very important question, which is what's next? What are the next steps for these guidelines?
So there are at least a couple of different things that are happening now. First of all, guidelines have been published to W3C's GitHub repo. And now we're accepting issues to be raised against them and pull requests to suggest changes. So that's community contribution. At the same time, as we mentioned before, these are community guidelines. And in order for these to become W3C's recommendations, which is W3C's a term for like a standard, there is quite a bit of work that has to happen. We need to form an official working group with W3C and go through a pretty detailed process of moving these towards standardization.
And are you confident this will happen?
There's going to be a lot of work, definitely. But we've seen over the last 16 months that we have really strong community there supporting this work. So I'm pretty sure that this is going to continue. And in addition to members who already kept contributing, we're starting to see quite a bit of interest from public. We're starting to see people adding issues to GitLab. Now, I think it's probably also the right time to invite people who would be interested in joining and continuing this journey with us. Community is open, so if you're interested in this topic, feel free to join us.
Ines, did you have time to review some of these contributions in the GitHub repository?
I just quickly actually scanned them, so not many, because at some point I actually had to disable the notification since it was so many. But
That's a very good news.
yeah, it is. It is. To be honest, it really is. It's very nice, because I guess one of the things that I definitely don't like is people who complain and don't offer solutions. So here's a lot of solutions, improvements being offered, and a lot of again, improvements being raised. So this is great. So again, like, invitation to everyone, please review the guidelines, give us your feedback, because this is the best way for us to make them even better.
Definitely. And to those who do not want to join, the huge majority of people working in web development and for whatever reason will not join, I guess it will still impact them. Am I right?
Yeah, well, it hopefully impacts everyone. No, unfortunately, we've seen with accessibility example that not much happens until it becomes a law. So hopefully, this as well goes towards that line. But my hope would be that everyone comes across them at some point, and again, hopefully implement some of this.
Makes total sense. And actually, I would like to ask you another little game to discuss what we can reasonably expect, because it all revolves around this hopefully world that you've used, Ines.
Yeah.
So I'd like you to share with us 3 sentences structured like this. In 2024, since the release of the WSG, people working in web dev have experienced something, noticed something, etc., etc. In 2026, since the release of WSG version, you pick the number, people working in web dev have something. And in 2030, since the release of WSG version XXX, people working in web dev have. So to help us structure a bit what we can, expect literally tomorrow, but also to give us a bit of perspective. Ines, would you like to start first?
Sure. So I would say in 2024, since the release of the WSG, people working in web dev have come across them. I think this would be like that they just seen that they exist. So for in the last for the next year, I guess that would be already a great achievement. And in 2026, I would say people working in web dev have implemented some of those guidelines.
And in 2030?
Oh, in 2030, legal. Let's go with legal.
Boom.
Boom.
Get ready, everyone.
Yeah. So for all of those who didn't do anything until 2026, here comes legal. Yeah. I would really love to see this becoming, again, some kind of not only a standard, but something as well on the legal base, because unfortunately, this is the only way to assure it gets everywhere.
And Lukasz, what is your take on it? Like 24, 26, 24, 26, 30? And what are, according to you, the odds that it becomes legal? But first, let's play the game.
All right, let's go for a game. So in 2024, since the release of WSG guidelines, people working in dev have contributed to them, have shared their feedback on them in order to make them as accurate and actionable as possible. By 2026, given the fact that everyone was contributing for such a long time, we have really amazing and very exact guidelines that can be executed, and we're starting to see some early adopters actually implementing them and seeing big improvements. And by 2030, I think by 2030, internet is zero carbon, and Yeah, all the work is achieved.
Do you believe that, both of you, do you believe that it could be used or leveraged in laws or regulations?
Yeah, I think so. So I'm seeing this as something very similar to web accessibility guidelines. In fact, that was really one of the main inspirations for us. So I'm hoping that these guidelines are going to follow the same pattern.
But Ines mentioned that it took a lot of time, and it's still, far, far, far from being achieved, worldwide accessibility, or even like basic accessibility across many, many websites. So do you believe it will take us as much time, or that we will see a faster track of adoption here?
Hopefully not, because these guidelines would live in bigger context of corporate sustainability, which is like a separate, bigger driver for implementation of these. And yeah, as we've been discussing before, regulations are already appearing in many places. So hopefully, we're not going to have to wait till 2050 for them to be implemented.
I would just like to add as well that they have so many benefits in general, no, to the business as well as in the end of the day, the people and environment. So, starting with better performance brings up better SEO and all that. Of course, having less stuff on your infrastructure saves money from these infrastructures. So I guess it's kind of very easy to as well see the benefits that they will bring, not only, to the environment, but in general.
Could we deep dive a bit on it? What are the main benefits that you see from adopting the sustainability guidelines?
Well, I guess now it's 93 guidelines, so it depends on which one. But I guess, well, everything sustainable web, as well as everything designing for that, goes towards the user. No, it's just this user experience. So hopefully we see through all the guidelines, first and foremost, decrease a bit on this, of course, the worldwide waste, this sheer amount of stuff on the internet now. So that's I think like one thing I would also hope for. And then other than that, as I already said, no, like the less things you have, the less it costs, no, to keep it where it is, the less it costs as well. For example, what I was mentioning, one of my favorite is caching as well. So if you don't hit the infrastructure so many times, again, less cost. So I would say some of these things, again, for like beneficial for business as well, not only for the user, which for me would be, having a great user experience, and then as well enable people to use their devices for as long as possible. I think there was this one thing that I heard recently. So my friend told me about it, that her dad had to buy a new phone, and it was not an old phone, like 2-3 years maybe, because his parking app stopped working. So I guess going towards eliminating these behaviors where, it's something crucial. No, you want to pay your parking. So it's not something that, you can just select a different app. It's something that like you in the end of the day should not be buying a new phone because of that.
That's terrible indeed. It's just, I'm under shock, like software obsolescence at its finest. So obviously, the W3C guidelines are a heavy document on its own. Actually, it has been built on, I didn't count this time, but more than 100 references. Still, I wanted to ask you, is there any other reference or materials that you would like to share to either better understand these guidelines or be able to apply them in a better way?
Well, I guess the main point would always be sustainablewebdesign.org website. So that's also where the guidelines is planned to be implemented in a, let's say, more user-friendly way.
And to end on the positive note, the podcast, and that's cool, pretty cool, because for once the podcast was quite positive. It is a big achievement, and we are moving forward definitely toward the right direction. Could you share one piece of good news which made you optimistic recently about our path toward a more sustainable world?
I guess like the random piece of news that I've seen recently, and I was positively surprised about it, was that I live in Munich in Germany. That July 2023 was the record month for amount of renewables inside of the German power grid, and it hit 69%. So this was information I was very kind of whoa, like kind of didn't expect it. So that was something that made me quite optimistic about, in the end of the day, way that we're evolving.
I just came back from New York Climate Week, and obviously plenty of people working in climate space there, plenty of connections. Really great to see this level of engagement. One of the things that feel really amazing is that we're seeing so many new applications of AI to solve climate problems. A couple of examples I came across would be using AI to flag greenwashing in sustainability reports, or using AI to increase number of asset level data analysis by 2 orders of magnitude in order to measure carbon emissions instead of just relying on company disclosures, or a tool that was used to talk to sustainability documents using natural language. We all know that AI has its own environmental impact, but it's great to see that it's also used as a solution.
Lukasz, you're aware that the first AI you mentioned, the one about greenwashing, will, on a very short period of time, drag the entire remaining resources on planet Earth. Because there is so much greenwashing.
That's right.
So thanks a lot, both of you. That was great to have you with all your insights on the Green.io show. Thanks a lot again for joining on a very short notice.
Thanks a lot for hosting. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this Green.io episode made in my daughter's bedroom, so I hope you enjoyed the sound. In episode 26, we will go to Latin America to meet Ismael Velasco, yet another active member of the W3C SustiWeb group. He's based in Mexico. And Catalina Zapata, the founder of La Web Verde in Colombia. We will talk about the progress and roadblocks of digital sustainability in this continent with its 300 million digital users. Stay tuned. And before you leave, a small message from our sponsor. I'm kidding. Green.io is a free and independent podcast, and so we needed your help to keep it that way. You can help us by supporting us on Tipeee. The link is in the episode notes. But if you cannot donate, that's fine. You can support us by spreading the word. Rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple and Spotify. Ask a friend to do it too. Each vote is worth 1,000 likes on YouTube, believe me. Sharing an episode on social media or directly with a relative is also more effective than many ads. Seriously, thanks for your support. It means a lot to us being me, but also Tani Levitt, our amazing podcast producer, and Gilles Tellier, our amazing podcast curator. And stay tuned by subscribing to our Green.io monthly newsletter. The link is in the episode notes, but you already know the drill. You will get carefully curated content, episode wrap-ups, and exclusive articles. It is as free and independent as the podcast itself. And as my daughter loves to say, and you might have noticed it in the latest Green.io episodes, it helps you, responsible technologists, build a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.